Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Hare Krishna. So we are continuing our discussion of the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. In the previous session, we focused on the aspect of the appearance and the disappearance of the Lord, his manifested and unmanifested pastimes. We also spoke briefly on the nature of identities. We spoke briefly for the last two sessions, which is practically sessions covering the previous chapter. We focused on the need to establish a spiritual identity and the need to endeavor towards establishing a spiritual identity, and to also learn how we could water the roots of the spiritual identity and how we could proceed towards making life successful by ensuring that life doesn't interfere with the establishment of our spiritual identity. What is very significant for us to understand is that Krishna and his servants, his pure servants, they facilitate Krishna consciousness. They don't interfere with Krishna consciousness. So sometimes we start imagining that Krishna is interfering with Krishna consciousness whilst we are putting out our very best effort. That never is the case. Krishna doesn't interfere with the progress of Krishna consciousness. He allows Krishna consciousness to happen. The maximum opportunity is also being given for us to foster our spiritual identity. What interferes with Krishna consciousness is life. Life interferes with Krishna consciousness. And what does it mean? It means that the process of Krishna consciousness is not complicated. If you were to really look at what we do in Krishna consciousness on a day-to-day basis, even if it were to be for the next 30, 40 years, it is not complicated. It is not complicated at all, because there isn't an imposition of extraordinary austerity. There really isn't an imposition of extraordinary austerity. There isn't. The chanting, can everybody go on mute, please? Because I'm hearing a lot of static. If you could, kindly. If you could check your phones. Thank you. So what we do notice is that life interferes with Krishna consciousness. What does it mean? We were just talking about the fact that the process of Krishna consciousness is not complicated, as much as we would like to believe it is. It is not a complicated process at all. And the reason why it's not complicated is due to, basically, we can say two factors. Number one, the process of Krishna consciousness that we follow in itself is not the reason for success. The reason for success in Krishna consciousness is sincerity, not so much what we do, but how we do it. And the second aspect to it is Krishna's mercy. So one can't really claim that they can really put in extraordinary efforts, and without Krishna's mercy and without the mercy of the Vaishnavas, they can achieve things, because the gifts we receive in Krishna consciousness cannot be given based on our effort. So we are dependent on mercy. We are Kripa Siddhas. Because we are Kripa Siddhas, and we have been given a process which is fairly uncomplicated, it requires effort, but not extraordinary effort. It does not require dramatic changes. It requires some level of adaptation so that we could water the roots of the spiritual identity. So as a consequence, we have a schedule. We want to live a Krishna-centered life. We eat food which is offered to Krishna. We think about Krishna in so many different activities before we move forward. Basically, this is a very fundamental and basic requirement of wanting to adapt to life in a place where Krishna is always in the center. If you're preparing for life in Vrindavan, eternal Vrindavan, then in eternal Vrindavan, Krishna is always in the center. So our preparation is basically setting ourselves up so that we could eventually, when we get there, be ready. Just as much as if one needs to get promoted at workplace, if you want to become a manager or a senior manager, you have to start functioning like one even before getting promoted. There's a basic requirement. It is common sense. It's very common sense that you start fulfilling and fitting into those shoes even before you get an opportunity to fit into those shoes. What they are looking at the workplace is to see if we are qualified to fit into those shoes. So in a similar fashion, we have been asked to foster our identity in the spiritual sky. We water the roots of the identity on a daily basis through chanting of Harinam. We water the roots of this daily identity by eating food which has been offered to Krishna. We basically are making an attempt to live a Krishna-centered life. And the 5 main angas of bhakti, or 5 main branches of Krishna consciousness activity, which could be associating with those who are well-versed in Krishna consciousness or serious in Krishna consciousness, who are greedy to attain the fruit of Krishna consciousness, which is to be able to serve Krishna with love. Associating with such devotees give us an opportunity to receive their enthusiasm into our hearts. Then we have the ability also to be enthused to chant the holy names with such enthusiasm, come in touch with Srimad Bhagavatam in a similar vein, worship the deity of Krishna, and aspire to live in Vrindavan, literally in Vrindavan, also in the Dham, which is non-different. The point we are trying to make is that we are basically setting ourselves up on a daily basis to water the identity of Krishna consciousness. This is our process. And there is some effort involved. But this effort is not an impossible task. Even if you are being asked to chant 16 rounds, not an impossible task. If you count the number of minutes in a day and the number of minutes you have been asked to allocate towards chanting of 16 rounds, you would notice that it's just a very small fraction, and you can easily make it happen. You would notice that offering food to Krishna is not a big deal at all, because you're going to be eating anyways. You're simply trying to facilitate the process by offering food to Krishna. Coming in touch with devotees, reading Srimad Bhagavatam. Basically, the effort of Krishna consciousness is not complicated, but life is complicated. Why am I saying life is complicated? Life is complicated because we were not desiring to be Krishna's servants 20 years back. We were not desiring to be Krishna's servants in many cases in the previous lifetime. As a consequence, we are born into circumstances that are quite complicated. Life is complicated. Krishna consciousness is not complicated. As a consequence, life sometimes interferes with Krishna consciousness. Krishna consciousness does not interfere with anything. Krishna doesn't interfere with Krishna consciousness. It's our life choices that interfere with Krishna consciousness, because we sometimes get into circumstances of very complicated lifestyles. Because of our complicated lifestyle, those complicated lifestyles require a lot of energy just to maintain. And because they require so much energy and so much effort just to maintain, it takes away the impetus for us to be able to focus on a spiritual identity. It's not possible. You can't really water and then enter, kind of put so much energy into something which is very complicated and also expect to not remember that all the time. It's not possible. So if you have a very complicated life, it would interfere with Krishna consciousness. Krishna consciousness is not complicated. Life can be complicated. So the purpose of sharing this again is that this is the issue. The issue is that we desire outside of Krishna consciousness. And when we start desiring outside of Krishna consciousness, then life gets created based on those desires. And such a lifestyle, which has been desired out of Krishna consciousness, meaning that it's independent of Krishna consciousness, tends to be complicated. It tends to have challenges. So Krishna consciousness, which is a simple process, it can get a lot of road bumps trying to fit into a complicated lifestyle. It should be the other way around. It should be the other way around. When we receive a call for Krishna consciousness, when we are receiving something so profound that we're going to spend the rest of eternity with Krishna in the Dham, serving him as a personal associate, which is exactly what is being offered by Krishna consciousness, then one should be able to put their life on the table and remove the clutter. Right? When you want to clear a table, I had a boss once. When I started out very early, I had a boss. He figured out that if he didn't really get it to the papers or whatever was on his desk long enough, then it would turn to rubbish, which is true. So he would not touch the piles of paper which were kept for him to look at. And he would ignore it for a week, week and a half, and he would find that he could safely discard it into the waste bin. Not a very powerful strategy, not something which I would advise you to do at the workplace. But what the point I'm trying to make is, if you had to put your life on the table, you would notice that there's a lot of clutter which can be removed. You would be able to make a lot of room. You would be able to clear out so much by just putting life on the table and start looking to see, I spend my day doing this. Is this important? Is this important? How could I improvise upon it? Such reflection becomes necessary because you're going to clear the path for uncomplicated life to happen. When life becomes uncomplicated, which is essentially a simple life, and it meets the uncomplicated process of Krishna consciousness, then there's a glorious, glorious meeting, because you then get to use Krishna consciousness to the fullest extent. Your life doesn't interfere. So in the previous chapter, we looked at how the king, Dhritarashtra, the others in the previous two chapters, the Lord himself appears and disappears. There's manifest pastimes, there's unmanifest pastimes. So there really isn't anything which is steady in this world. As a consequence, there's a need for us to constantly evaluate where our energy is going. Am I putting in energy into something which is extraordinarily transient? If it is so transient, and if it is going to disappear a week down the line, 2 weeks down the line, if it really doesn't matter in the long haul, then is it really required for me to put in so much energy into something which may not matter? See, these evaluations would allow you to uncomplicate life. Evaluate and see if a particular decision, a particular circumstance, a particular envisioning of the future can complicate your Krishna consciousness. What do I mean by that? If you're going to go into a certain future where the identity that you would be holding is going to require extraordinary attention from you, to the compromise of Krishna consciousness, where it becomes so complicated that you can't chant, you can't associate, it's time for you to evaluate such a future. You would need to rethink those goals. So the point I'm trying to make is, it is actually intelligent to not reinvent the wheel. This is what Srimad Bhagavatam is trying to teach us. Yeah? We do not want to reinvent things which we already are aware of and they're working. You don't want to fix things that way. So if there is a specific concept which has been coming from Srimad Bhagavatam, where you notice that at some point, everybody who has been successful has basically started putting energy and attention to Krishna consciousness in a great manner, in a greater manner than they would have progressively, then that is the path we should choose as well. So the point I'm trying to make is, don't desire complicated lifestyles. Decidedly think about simplifying. And it doesn't matter if you're going to live in a palace or you're going to live in an apartment. I'm not talking about the size of your home. I'm not talking about any of that, because it depends on what is easy for you to do. I'm not referring to what it is suitable for all of us. That is not the reference point. I'm merely saying that if your need is for a big home, stop there. Don't try and go for the second big home and the third big home and the fourth big home. It doesn't make sense, because you're complicating your lifestyles. Yeah? If you need a roof over your head and you're simple-minded and you think basically a roof over your head is all you need, and if that's the blessing that you have a simple mind which accepts the simplicity of your surroundings, fantastic. Work towards it and then put your energy in Krishna consciousness. Because it's not going to be worthwhile. It is not going to be worthwhile to fritter away our energy into complicated plans to a point where life is so complicated that it can't handle a simple process such as Krishna consciousness? Imagine, if you can't give 2 hours to Krishna consciousness, then your life is complicated, very complicated. If when you are sitting in and handling Krishna consciousness for those 2 hours, if your mind can't remain still and it's going hither and thither, trying to figure things out which are dragging your mind away, life is complicated. Think about it, reflect on it, try and desire a simple life because Krishna will help. So the whole desiring process has to change. And this was the topic for the last 2 weeks. I mention things repeatedly, more than once, when I find that it's an important concept. If it is just simple enough, but can be thought of, it can change life over a period of time, I tend to repeat because it can help you. So the point I'm trying to make is Krishna consciousness is uncomplicated. You need to complement that uncomplicated process with an uncomplicated life. What interferes ultimately with an uncomplicated process is a complicated life. If your life is complicated, it will interfere with Krishna consciousness. As a consequence, uncomplicating life, having a simpler view of what is required so that you could put your energy into Krishna consciousness, is the intelligent thing to do. If you start now, and if you're lucky, you could make changes in this lifetime. But if you start now, and if you're very lucky and you're still lucky, you could still make changes over several lifetimes. You see, this is a process which is going to take more than a lifetime in many cases. So there really isn't a necessity to think that the thought process of wanting an uncomplicated lifestyle so that you could focus your energies in Krishna consciousness, should yield results in the next day or two or month or 2 months is not necessarily the case. If you start desiring it, Krishna will make that arrangement at an appropriate time. It can happen in this lifetime, or it may happen in the subsequent lifetime. You still would have achieved a lot. You would have achieved a lot even if you engineer an entire lifetime which is uncomplicated and which can be absorbed in Krishna consciousness. But you need to start someplace. My suggestion, start right away. Start right away in evaluating where you are, evaluating things, putting things on the table. You will be able to see things as being required, not required, uncomplicated, based on your sincerity. If you're sincere, you would be able to have a clear view of what is required and what is not required about the future. And that in turn would assist you in planning a lifestyle which wouldn't interfere with a very uncomplicated process. Again, the summary is Krishna consciousness is easy. Krishna consciousness is natural. Krishna consciousness is our birthright. We are made to be Krishna conscious in reality. What is stopping us is the complicated lifestyles which we are adhering to. So evaluate your lifestyle choices. Evaluate your life in general. Put it on the table. Start examining different components to see what is complicating it and how you could simplify. At least sit and desire such an outcome. Because if you sit and desire a future which is uncomplicated, which is helpful for Krishna consciousness, you will receive the power for you to make a modification of life itself. That's the message for the last 2 chapters. In this chapter, we are somewhat continuing with the theme. It's a continuation of the theme because the title of chapter 15 of first canto is the Pāṇḍavas retire timely. What are they retiring from? What are they retiring from? They are retiring from a situation which could be called complicated, which could not allow enough absorption, to a circumstance which would allow them to become more absorbed. So this is a continuation of the theme. This is a continuation of the theme. Why is all of this being discussed in the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam? Why is it that we are coming across retirement stories in the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam? If you were to look at life, the retirement story is supposed to be right in the end. Why is it that the retirement story is right in the beginning in Srimad Bhagavatam? It is right in the beginning in the first canto, and major personalities who have ruled the world, who have led very complicated lifestyles. Being a king is very complicated. Very complicated, because as you step into the shoes of a king and you're sitting on the throne, you almost feel like God. There's very little opportunity for a king to think that he is not in charge. Very little opportunity. Unless he is a sadhu and he has already worked on himself and he is a Rajarishi, he is sitting on the throne. He is surrounded by people who look upon him like God. Now, where is the opportunity for kingship and for him to become a servant of God in that sense, internally? That opportunity exists because all the Pandavas, they were sadhus. In other words, internally, they were rishis. Internally, they were well situated in Krishna consciousness. Externally, they were acting according to what is required by their dharma. But their dharma itself is to be a king. It's quite complicated. So it is being brought up right in the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. We see retirement stories of all these great personalities who were a part of the Kurukshetra war. And this was required to give us an idea that even if you want to be completely absorbed in Krishna consciousness and to completely understand, Krishna consciousness in its full, then at the very least, I'm not suggesting people give up their jobs. I'm suggesting at the very least, there has to be a prioritization of Krishna consciousness to the maximum level. And there's also got to be an aspiring or an aspiration or a desiring of a future outcome which is going to be less complicated. This is absolutely required. So we are dealing with retirement stories in the first canto as if to take a message from all of this that you at some point in time need to become absorbed, and that is going to require your focusing on singularly on the identity of being Krishna's servant. And that is going to require perhaps simplifying your life. So retiring for the kings is to simplify life. What do? They practically give up their kingdom. They give up the paraphernalia that comes with it. They give up their responsibilities and hand over their responsibilities to the next in charge, whoever is supposed to take over. They walk away to the forest. Now, they're not taking a whole bunch of resources to the forest. They walk away to the forest empty-handed. And why is this being done? This is observed. Why is it being done? It is being observed. It is being done because the first hallmark of a sadhu is to be dependent on the Lord. Dependence on the Lord is the first hallmark, the first quality of a sadhu. When we become dependent on Krishna's mercy completely, then we have the ability to focus and to depend and to grow in Krishna consciousness. So that's why you find that when Dhritarashtra, whoever went away from the palace onto the forest, they leave to the forest with just the cloth which is covering their bodies. They just don't take anything with them. And this is a prerequisite because dependence on Krishna is a prerequisite for being a sadhu. If you depend on Harinam, that's a prerequisite for being called a sadhu. Depending on Nama is non-different from depending on Krishna, is a prerequisite. So we see them walking away. What does this also mean? They're uncomplicating their lifestyles. They're heading towards a lifestyle which is very uncomplicated. They have done their part. They've done their duty. They're not walking away and absolving the duty. They've done their part. They've done their duty. Then they're walking to an uncomplicated lifestyle. This is required because when you start walking towards an uncomplicated lifestyle, when you're set up with an environment which is in the mode of goodness, the mode of goodness is uncomplicated. Essentially, the mode of goodness does not require heavy thinking to maintain. It's simple by its nature, which is also an argument which is brought up here. you need the mode of goodness as a platform to practice transcendence. Without the platform of goodness, one can't practice transcendence. The mode of goodness is also simple. Are closer to nature and they are simple. They are not complicated. If you have a very complicated lifestyle, you will need the mode of passion to manage the complicated lifestyle. The moment you have the mode of passion to manage the complicated lifestyle, you will not have the advantage of being situated in an appropriate platform to practice Krishna consciousness. So again, the argument is simplification equals, mode of goodness equals simplification. Simplification is basically going to also require one, to be situated in such an environment where they're able to continue to be simple so that they do not need the material mode of passion to exist. Because the moment you need the material mode of passion to exist, then you have a problem in your hands, because the material mode of passion will not allow you to be focused in your sadhana. It's not going to allow you to focus in your sadhana. The material mode of passion would basically help us constantly think of arrangements of the future. It would make us very anxious of the future. We would constantly be looking to see what we could do to improvise the future in terms of comfort, etc. So the material mode of passion is not conducive. So again, to summarize, Pandavas retired timely to the forest. So why do they do it? They are simplifying. They're going into the mode of goodness. The mode of goodness has a characteristic of being simple. And that particular characteristic of simple essentially means that everything can be maintained easily. If it's going to require the mode of passion, then we lose the advantage that is there intrinsically for us to be able to chant and to be able to make advancement. So it's not it is not basically a situation which is very difficult to understand. So again, if you want to talk about modes, complicated lifestyle equals mode of passion. Simple lifestyle, mode of goodness. If you have to put enormous energy to maintain your lifestyle, mode of passion. Simple lifestyle where you don't have to think so much, it's all arranged to some extent, and you basically can peacefully sit and chant, mode of goodness. So we're getting messages from so many different angles on how to re-engineer our future. Re-engineering your future requires that we envision the mode of goodness, we understand where we ought to be and what we need to do, and start kind of looking at it from different angles. Even if you are very passionate and you want to engage in Krishna's service in functions that require passion, you should still have an uncomplicated lifestyle, because that would allow you at any given time to rest on something which is simpler and which can be managed if you choose to do so. The real issue that starts with life is that when people make progress in life after they graduate, they keep adding things to their life and adding responsibilities to such an extent that life becomes complicated. So life becomes complicated, and then it is not able to interact with Krishna consciousness comfortably, because Krishna consciousness is a simple process. It is not complicated. So this is the devotee issue. Devotees worldwide are not struggling with their sadhana. They are struggling with life. They are struggling with life choices. They are making choices which are complicated. They go towards a future which is more complicated. And eventually they reach a position where it starts affecting their sadhana. They should start reversing it by aspiring for a simple arrangement. And when I say simple arrangement, I'm not talking about going and staying under a tree. I'm not saying that. I'm talking about at least simplify it to the point where it doesn't consume you day in and day out. This is required. That's why we read retirement stories in the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. Basically, they're saying you want to enter further into Srimad Bhagavatam in absorption, you need to have a certain level of an uncomplicated mind which can absorb yourself in it. It doesn't mean that you give up Srimad Bhagavatam if you have a complicated lifestyle. That's not the message. You can still do what I'm suggesting you do and still be successful. So the point I'm just trying to make is start understanding Srimad Bhagavatam. It's a practical presentation. There are so many messages which are practical, which can be applied. The most important message which is being given in these past 3 chapters is about great personalities with great complicated lifestyles, desiring to end this complication and then go towards a simplified lifestyle so that they could absorb themselves in Krishna consciousness. This should be the devotee attitude. This should be an aspiration for the devotee. This should really be an aspiration to simplify for the future. So let's just read the chapter and then we will comment on it further. So this is chapter 15. It's entitled, The Pāṇḍavas Retire Timely. Sutta Goswami said, Arjuna, the celebrated friend of Lord Krishna, was grief-stricken because of his strong feeling of separation from Krishna. Over and above all Maharaja Yudhishthira's speculative inquiries. Basically, the questions asked by Yudhishthira in the previous chapter have made Arjuna very grief-stricken. And as a consequence, we are looking at a circumstance of Arjuna basically displaying and going through emotions which are quite intense. Due to grief, Arjuna's mouth and lotus-like heart had dried up. Therefore, his body lost all luster. Now, remembering the Supreme Lord, he could hardly utter a word in reply. Can anyone confirm if there's a noise level which is very high in my environment? Do you feel it's too noisy? Sorry?
It's not much noisy, Prabhu. Like little disturbance is there, but not much noise.
Okay, so no, because the power was down and then now a few things have started up. Perhaps I'll leave it as it is. I don't want to get up. With great difficulty, he checked the tears of grief that smeared his eyes. He was very distressed because Lord Krishna was out of his sight, and he increasingly felt affection for him. Remembering Lord Krishna and his well-wishes, benefactions, intimate familial relations, and his chariot driving, Arjuna, overwhelmed and breathing very heavily, began to speak. Arjuna said, O king, the Supreme Personality of Godhead Hari, who treated me exactly like an intimate friend, has left me alone. Thus my astounding power, which astonished even the demigods, is no longer with me. Is no longer with me. See, this grief which Arjuna is going through is also coming with a lot of realizations. Realization that the entire source of my power was Krishna. I was considered to be so powerful, the demigods used to seek help from me in quelling their enemies. That entire source of power was Krishna. That conclusion is also coming. I have just lost him, whose separation for a moment would render all the universes unfavorable and void like bodies without life. Only by his merciful strength was I able to vanquish all the lusty princes assembled at the palace of King Drupada for the selection of the bridegroom. With my bow and arrow, I could pierce the fish target and thereby gain the hand of Draupadi. So, first he is remembering his early journey. The early journey that he remembers has to do with participating in the archery contest set up by Draupadi's father. And he's saying, if not for his mercy, I would never have been able to win. Because he was near me, it was possible for me to conquer with great dexterity the powerful king of heaven, Indradeva, along with his demigod associates, and thus enable the fire god to devastate the Pāṇḍava forest. And only by his grace was the demon named Maya saved from the blazing Pāṇḍava forest, and thus we could build an assembly house of wonderful architectural workmanship, where all the princes assembled during the performance of Rajasuya Yajna and paid you tributes. So he is basically saying, it was not only me who succeeded, you succeeded as well. Your opulences came because of Krishna's presence. your respectable younger brother who possesses the strength of 10,000 elephants, killed by his grace Jarasandha, whose feet were worshipped by many kings. These kings had been bought for sacrifice in Jarasandha's Mahabhairava Yagya, but they were thus released. Later, they paid tribute to your majesty. So, Bhima has the strength of 10,000 elephants. But Bhima, with the strength of 10,000 elephants, could not have won Jarasandha. It was because of Krishna's grace that Bhima was able to defeat Jarasandha. It was he only who loosened the hair of all the wives of the miscreants who dared open the cluster of your queen's hair, which had been nicely dressed and sanctified for the great Rajasuya sacrificial ceremony. At that time, she fell down at the feet of Lord Krishna with tears in her eyes. So, the Vedic custom or the Vedic standard is that women whose hair is tied is considered to be auspicious. Women with loose hair is considered to be inauspicious. Widows in the Vedic custom, they used to leave their hair loose, or rather, I wouldn't use the word widows. Basically, when there was mourning because of the loss of their husband, that is when the widows, they wouldn't dress their hair, they would let their hair loose. It was very inauspicious to have loose hair by women. So this verse is being said here, where Arjuna is saying all the wives of the Kauravas, they had to loosen their hair in lamentation and crying for the loss of their husbands, because the Kauravas, headed by Duryodhana, had insulted Draupadi and had loosened her hair. So this is basically a statement being made that even the war of Kurukshetra was won by Krishna's grace. A statement is also being made that even though we, as her husband, were so powerful, we could not defend the honor of our wife, Draupadi. You defended, Krishna defended the honor. So this is being remembered by Arjuna. During our exile, Durvasa Muni, who eats with his 10,000 disciples, intrigued with our enemies to put us in dangerous trouble. At that time, Lord Krishna, simply by accepting the remnants of food, saved us. By his accepting food, thus the assembly of Munis, while bathing in the river, felt sumptuously fed, and all the three worlds were also satisfied. So there was some mischief which was carried out by Duryodhana. Durvasa Muni, who carries the power of Lord Shiva, he carries the power of Rudra. He has great anger, or he has the ability of Rudra, or ability of Lord Shiva, to ultimately to be able to carry burdens, you see, basically to carry the burden, to handle the mode of ignorance. But that ability also comes with intense anger. So Durvasa Muni was very impulsive because of the situation, because of his conditioning due to this power. He was impulsive because he had 10,000 disciples, and if he basically were to be offended, he wouldn't hesitate to give some of the most dreadful curses on whoever offends him. And these were like intensely dreadful curses. There were people who could possibly have problems for lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. And this Durvasa Muni, when he was fed by Duryodhana, he was somehow or the other motivated by Duryodhana to go and visit Yudhishthira, who was living in a hut. He was exiled. He didn't have the resources. So you go there, my brother Yudhishthira would also like to feed you. So Duryodhana instigates Durvasa Muni. Durvasa Muni takes his 10,000 disciples and lands up for lunch in Draupadi's hut while they were in exile. She was given a pot by Lord Surya, and this pot which was given to her had the capacity to feed as many people as she wanted, as long as she doesn't eat. On that particular day, she had already fed the Pandavas, distributed some alms, and she had also accepted prasadam. As a consequence, the pot couldn't yield anything. Otherwise, they would have very easily fed the entire assembly of Durvasa Muni with 10,000 disciples. When he lands up there, she goes into a calamity. First of all, she thinks that, I'm in such a dreadful situation that I'm in the forest. I have this huge number of people whom I have to feed. And then now I have eaten and I don't even have this particular ability to do anything. So she goes into a very big lamentation. She's an empress. She's the emperor's wife. And she goes into a lamentation because she can't feed people. So this is how bad it was in that particular circumstance, a lot of emotions that she was going through. Then at that point in time, she takes refuge of Krishna. She starts thinking and praying to him, saying, Krishna, only you can save us. Krishna appears. And what does Krishna do? He does something which makes Draupadi feel even worse. Krishna says, okay, you feed me and I will feed them. And she says, I have nothing to feed you. Imagine Krishna coming to your house and saying, okay, give me something to eat. And you look around and you just don't have anything to feed. How dreadful a situation is if Krishna were to come to your house and say, give me something to eat, and you don't have it. Draupadi felt that way. Then ultimately, she was looking into the pots. There was a grain. That grain, cooked grain, Krishna just took that grain, he put it into his mouth, and he ate that. The moment he ate that piece of grain, cooked grain, from the pot, that was the only grain that was left sticking to the side, everybody was satisfied. It is so fascinating. Sometimes when you offer the deities the bhoga, then even if you're hungry, you don't feel hungry after that. I don't know if you have experienced it. I have experienced it when I offer my deities at times. Initially, I'm hungry, and then I do the seva for the deities and make the offering, and I suddenly, after they have accepted it, I feel so satisfied that I don't feel like eating because my hunger is satisfied. This is a practical experience that many of us do go through when we are serving deities. In a similar fashion here, Krishna accepts a small piece of prasadam, which is left, a very tiny, tiny portion. By his taking the tiny portion, him being the super soul, he satisfies everybody. He satisfies. So Durvasa Muni just leaves. It's quite significant. What is significant about this verse and about Arjuna remembering this is because they were kings. There's nothing worse for a Kshatriya than to be asked for something and they can't give you that. Nothing worse. It is nothing worse for a Kshatriya than to spread their hands out to receive alms. It's a big insult for a Kshatriya. So this is quite significant in his mind. In his mind, there's such significance here because he's saying, I'm in the forest. We are Kshatriyas. It was such an insulting experience that we are in the forest in certain ways. And then we can't feed our guests, which is a greater insult. And then the Lord appears. We can't feed him, even bigger insult. And then the Lord basically saves us by accepting whatever we have. He takes a remnant, accepts it. Everybody is satisfied. So this is fascinating in terms of satisfying the whole creation. You just need to satisfy Krishna. Everything just falls in place. It was by his influence only that in a fight, I was able to astonish the personality of God, Lord Shiva, and his wife, the daughter of Mount Himalaya. Thus he, which is Lord Shiva, became pleased with me and awarded me his own weapon. Other demigods also delivered their respective weapons to me. And in addition, I was able to reach the heavenly planets in this present body and was allowed a half-elevated seat. Yeah, the heavenly planets and the position in the heavenly planets are literally positions. Unless you have a position, you can't occupy seats of honor. So he was given a seat of honor, and he's saying it was a half-elevated seat. So there must have been hierarchy in which he was given a half-elevated seat. He was allowed to go in the human body, which is again very, very difficult to do so, which is almost impossible, because the human body really doesn't have the capacity to enter into the heavenly planets, which means that the human body, Arjuna's body, was transformed to be able to go there because of Krishna's mercy. So he's again remembering the extraordinary benediction which he received from Lord Shiva. How could anybody defeat Lord Shiva in battle? Arjuna defeated him and he became very pleased. That was Krishna's gift. Only Krishna could defeat Lord Shiva. And that happened through the auspices of Arjuna. So he was an instrument. When I stayed for some days as a guest in the heavenly planets, all the heavenly demigods, including King Indradeva, took shelter of my arms, which were marked with the Gandhiva bow, to kill the demon named Nivata Kavacha. O King, descendant of Ajamida, at the present moment, I am bereft of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, by whose influence I was so powerful. So basically, he's saying, I went to the heavenly planets and I helped the demigods defeat someone. That is how powerful I was. And he's saying, I am bereft of Krishna. Now I realize it. This is a realization from Arjuna. And the reason for the realization will become apparent as we go through this chapter. The military strength of the Kauravas was like an ocean in which there dwelled many invincible existences. And thus it was insurmountable, but because of his friendship, I, seated on the chariot, was able to cross over it. And only by his grace was I able to regain the cows and also collect by force many helmets of the kings, which were bedecked with jewels, which were sources of all brilliance. This is basically his description of his winning in the Kurukshetra battle. Because Arjuna could not have defeated Bhishma. Arjuna could not have defeated Drona. It was not possible. It was not possible because they were extraordinarily skilled. Even if you call them as being equal to Arjuna, that in itself is a statement. Karna. There was no way Karna could be defeated. He was on par. So the point which is being made here is that their lifespan was reduced. Krishna intervened. He is the time factor. He reduced the lifespan of those who are in front of his devotee, and as a consequence, the devotee was able to succeed. It was he only who withdrew the duration of life from everyone, and who in the battlefield withdrew the speculative power and strength of enthusiasm from the great military phalanx made by the Kauravas, headed by Bhishma, Karna, Drona, Shalya, etc. The arrangement was expert and more than adequate, but he, while going forward, did all this. Yeah? So basically, there were great military generals in the Kaurava army. Their arrangements were very, very powerful. So-called battle strategy was very powerful. Krishna basically unwound and made everything happen for the Pāṇḍavas. Great generals like Bhishma, Drona, Karna, Bhurishrava, Susharma, Shalya, Jayadratha, and Balika all directed their invincible weapons against me. But by his grace, they could not even touch a hair on my head. Similarly, Prahalad Maharaj, the supreme devotee of Lord Narasimhadeva, was unaffected by the weapons the demons used against him. Arjuna is giving the example of Prahalad Maharaj and Narasimhadev, where he is giving the example saying, there were such terrible weapons and invincible weapons that were used that they could cause me no harm because Krishna was protecting me. The same thing was done to Prahalad Maharaj. When Narasimhadev was protecting him, nothing could happen. It was by his mercy only that my enemies neglected to kill me when I descended from a chariot to get water for my thirsty horses. It was due to my lack of esteem for my Lord that I dared engage him as my chariot driver, for he is worshipped and offered services by the best men to attain salvation. O King, his jokings and frank talks were pleasing and beautifully decorated with smiles. His addresses unto me as, O son of Pritha, O friend, O son of Kuru dynasty, and all such haughtiness are now remembered by me, and thus I am overwhelmed. Generally, both of us used to live together and sleep, sit, and loiter together, and at the time of advertising oneself for acts of chivalry, sometimes, if there were any irregularity, I used to reproach him by saying, My friend, you're very truthful. Even in those hours when his value was minimized, he, being the supreme soul, used to tolerate all those utterings of mine, excusing me exactly as a true friend excuses his true friend, or a father excuses his son. O Emperor, now I am separated from my friend and dearmost well-wisher, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and therefore my heart appears to be void of everything. In his absence, I have been defeated by a number of infidel, cowherd men while I was guarding the bodies of all the wives of Krishna. I want to stop here this week, and I want to take up a different theme the following week. So, what I want to do is basically take up the theme of power and how power is received and how power is perceived by pure devotees. You can't really do much without power. There's a need for power to accomplish things. It's a practical requirement. But how is it being seen? How is it being perceived? How is it received as a part of Krishna consciousness? So that is going to be the theme for the following week when we conclude it, because the reading of the verses, of 20 verses, is all about Arjuna talking about how amazing it was that I was able to win all those battles. How amazing it was that I was able to do things which I could practically not imagine doing on my own. Then this verse of number 20 is significant. In this verse, he's saying, I've accomplished so much as a military man, and my weapons were so powerful, but when ordinary, I would say cowherd men, they came and they accosted and they snatched away the wives of Krishna, I couldn't protect them. Arjuna was astonished. Arjuna was astonished, saying, I was given so much power by the Lord to accomplish so many things on his behalf. But when the time came to protect the wives of Lord Krishna, as they were being transported from Dwaraka back to Hastinapur, they were attacked by the Yadus, by cowherd men who were actually not the Yadus, but by wayward people, by low-class people. They snatched the wives of Krishna. Some of them were kidnapped, and so on and so forth. Some of them were hurt. They passed away. They perished. Arjuna was astonished that he couldn't protect the wives of Krishna, which in itself was such a big sign to him, saying, I have accomplished so much militarily that I couldn't do this task of bringing Krishna's wives to Hastinapur. He has left me. There's something here where he has basically left me, and along with him have gone all my abilities. So we'll talk about this part next week. And we basically spoke about the theme, and basically we also gave you a little bit of sense of what is required to proceed further in fostering Krishna consciousness. One of the most important aspects is to be able to comfortably and simply be able to water the roots of Krishna consciousness. In the following week, next session, we will talk about this aspect of having power and not having power, and how Krishna basically arranges and to basically give power, and what the devotee does in having the proper approach to power. We'll talk about it in the following week. I'll stop here, and I'll see if I can take questions. Any questions?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Yeah, I was going to say that how do you stop the mind from magnifying even little things? Obviously, big things are big anyway, but sometimes when you try and keep your life uncomplicated, it still has a tendency to make you magnify even the small irritationable things, or or even if there's no problem there, you create a problem somehow, the mind. So it seems like it's always there to distract you from your Krishna consciousness. It seems to divert you.
Yes. So your question is, how do you control the temperament or the nature of the mind, which seems to be so naturally distracting?
Yes, that's right. Thank you.
The mind is naturally distracting in the lower modes of consciousness. The mind is naturally distracting and filled with all kinds of thoughts if the mind were to be situated in passion and ignorance. The mind is less distracting if it were to be in the mode of goodness. So as a strategy, we want to arrange a lifestyle which is in the mode of goodness. By strategy, we want to also do things which can keep our mind in the mode of goodness. Waking up at a certain time, eating and going to bed at a certain time, having spiritual practices at junctions of the day where the subsequent parts of time during the day become very powerfully spiritually laden. So if you worship the Guru early in the morning and you chant your rounds early in the morning during the junction of night and day, which is the Brahma Muhurta, the first Muhurta, then that has the ability to influence the whole day. So if you sow seeds of mode of goodness in that particular time, then you have the ability to bring in goodness during the day. You again can water, that particular consciousness and to kind of renew it, recharge it during the afternoon junction between 12 and 1. You could do a little reading of Srimad Bhagavatam if you're so situated. You could do a little chanting. Depending on where you are and what you do, you could kind of use the junction to, again, build up a certain tempo. You could do the same at 6 o'clock in the evening. The point I'm trying to make is we have to strategize to be in the mode of goodness. The lower modes, by nature, will attract a lot of dirt. We will also find it very difficult to navigate and push ourselves away from that.
Oh, I see. So basically try to raise yourself into the mode of goodness, keep to the mode of goodness as much as you can.
Exactly. And it requires work. It requires an understanding. It requires that we use the knowledge that we have been given to worship, for example, Prabhupada in the morning. To worship, if you are at home and you have the ability, do a little arti in the afternoon between 12 and 1. If you're home and you have the ability, do another arti between 12 and 1, 6 and 7, or do some reading, do some chanting, do some kirtan. If you notice, if you go into our temples, you have Mangal Arti, and then you have a vast majority of our programs happen between 4 and 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning. And then you have a mid-afternoon arati, and then you have an evening arati. Why is this? Because you're trying to take advantage of the 3 different junctions of time, and you're creating auspiciousness which would last and then influence the rest of the day. So we need to learn how to use these things properly. Even if you can't really do an arati, you could read the Srimad Bhagavatam during these junctions. You could do some chanting during these junctions. So I would suggest all of these to kind of manage the time during the day. And in that sense, what would happen is you would be able to kind of manage your mind as well, eventually.
Okay, thank you. So the times you mentioned, obviously, the morning Mangalarti period, then the 12 till 1. And what was the evening segment?
The evening junction. I'm talking about sunset. Sorry, I'm talking about sunrise, noon, and sunset.
Oh, thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Prabhu. I'll certainly look into that as much as I can.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Please accept
Hare
my
Krishna.
Thank you for this wonderful class, Prabhu. I have one question. As per the theme of today's topic came up that how Pāṇḍavas timely retired. So do we see any contrast between Srimad Bhagavatam where it says that how in the first canto, how the Pandavas timely retired. On the other hand, we see the context of Bhagavad Gita, where Arjun wants to get retired, but Krishna says, right now your duty is to fight. So what is in our life, because when we came into Krishna conscious, many of us, we were not born into Krishna conscious environment, right? So at that time, we have so much extended our responsibilities, so-called liabilities, and now we are bound to face them and we are bound to look after them. And so what is the time frame where we decide on that, yes, now is the time that I should retire and not should go on fulfilling our so-called mundane duties?
Okay, so there were two questions. I want to address each carefully. First question, there is no contrast between Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. Arjuna's confusion in Bhagavad Gita was that he was immersing himself into other identities. He was not being Krishna conscious. That was his problem. Krishna finally said, Sarvadharman parityajya mamekam sharanam vraja. What does it mean when he says give up all kinds of dharma? Because you have dharma towards your grandfather. You have dharma in the relationship towards your cousins. You have dharma in the relationship towards your friends. Arjuna, you are now getting overwhelmed with all those different dharmas that have come up because of the different identities that you have established in relation to these people. And now you are allowing all those identities and dharmas to compete with my instructions and my relationship with you. As a consequence, Krishna is basically telling Arjuna, Sarva dharman parityajya mamekam sharanam vraja. He says, first and foremost, prioritize my relationship with you. You should prioritize my relationship with you. So Arjuna's task of prioritizing Krishna's relationship with him is the entire theme of Bhagavad Gita. Krishna is basically saying, you prioritize. And what circumstances did Krishna want him to prioritize? Terrible circumstances, where Arjuna basically had to kill the different relatives on the opposite side. That is how Krishna's relationship with Arjuna was basically established. In other words, the identity of Arjuna being a servant of Krishna and Sarvadharman Parityajya, having the idea of Krishna's dharma, the dharma of Arjuna towards Krishna being supreme, that idea being established on the battlefield in a very intense way is the theme of the Bhagavad Gita. So that is exactly what we are speaking of here as well. There is no contradiction, because even here we are saying we have so many different identities. The identity of a father, mother, professional, relative, so many different identities. Yeah? And all these identities, in different ways, as you put it, are competing with Krishna consciousness for attention, because we never thought about Krishna consciousness when in the future, in the sense 20 years back, 30 years back, when we came into our life and when we started envisioning a lifestyle and we wanted to envision what future would be, we never thought about Krishna consciousness because we were not aware of it in many cases. And the other identities were established by nature, because that's exactly how life works. You grow up, and then depending on who you are, you get married, you find a profession for yourself, you proceed in that profession. All of that has happened because we just didn't know that we had to include Krishna and think of Krishna while doing all of this. So it doesn't mean one shouldn't think of their future. It doesn't mean one doesn't get married. It doesn't mean one doesn't qualify themselves professionally. It doesn't mean one doesn't function as a professional. It simply means the Krishna ingredient was missing. So we need to do what Krishna asked Arjuna to do. Krishna said, Arjuna, Sarvadharman parityajya mamekam sharanam vraja. First, put the identity of being Krishna's servant into the forefront. Once that identity comes to the forefront, start thinking about everything else and how other things can fit in. It's easier to do it that way. It becomes complicated when we prioritize every other identity in the world and then take Krishna and try and see, maybe I can fit you here, I can fit you here, I can fit you there. That's very difficult for us to do, because Krishna can't just fit in a small gap where, between two other or three other priorities. He's saying, you fit me in first in your life. establish my identity first, my identity with you first in your life, and then you fit everybody else around me. It doesn't mean you stop being a mother. It doesn't mean you stop being a wife. It doesn't mean you stop being a father. It doesn't mean you stop being a professional. Establish Krishna's identity first, because then you will know how to prioritize life. Then you would know how to arrange for things. You wouldn't stretch yourself to the point where you make promises which can't be kept to the other identities which can compromise Krishna consciousness. So that is what the theme was. So there is no contradiction, in my opinion, because Arjuna did not want to focus on Krishna consciousness. He wasn't. He was basically wanting to do what would be comfortable to his senses and to his mind, his emotions. And Krishna was pointing out, saying, if my duty and my instructions to you are difficult for you to follow, and that is when you start thinking that you should renounce, then there's a problem. That's why Krishna says, you better do what I'm asking you to do, even if you're uncomfortable, because that's your problem. That's exactly what you need to do. Even if you're uncomfortable, follow the instructions. You see, that is the whole idea. So does that make sense, Mataji? Did I answer your question or two?
Yes, Prabhu. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for such a clear understanding.
Sure. Any other question or comment?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. I want to ask you one question.
Yeah, can you speak up a little bit, Ravi? Yeah.
Yes, Prabhu. It may not be important question, but still it's there in my mind for many days.
Sure. Please go ahead.
Like you said that for a woman to have loosened hair is inauspicious, but we see in modern days the contrary to that. Like people who are prosperous, successful people, they just leave their hair like loosen, and they encourage their kids to also do that. The way they dress, everything. Whereas the people unsuccessful, not very rich, those people only maintain all these traditions. I have this doubt how to understand this, like, because I heard the same thing from other gurus also, like for women should not have loosened hair, all that. But I want to understand this.
See, we need to understand things by Desha Kalapatra. What does it mean? Desha Kalapatra means time, place, and circumstances. We want to focus on the essence. We want to focus on the essence of Krishna consciousness, where our objective is for people to experience Krishna consciousness without focusing so much on the cultural aspect of being Hindu and Indian. And the reason I'm making a mention of this is because we are a worldwide movement. And we are also in modern times. Culture and how to act and how to integrate with the Vedic environment can come later. We do not want to impose details of culture whilst preaching. We do not want to impose details of culture while requesting someone to chant, while requesting someone to participate in a kirtan program, while requesting someone to basically, honor prasadam, etc. We want them to experience Krishna consciousness in an unfettered, uncomplicated way where they are accepted as they are. We want them to come, sit with us, and honor as they are. Let them dress in any way they want. Let them portray their personality in any way they want. We want them to come in and participate in this movement in a very open, easy way where we don't expect them to change anything. So the point I'm trying to make is, number one, the cultural aspects of Vedic times, while being very useful, are also useless if people are not chanting and people are not serving.
Yes, bro.
Right? Because you will find in India that there would be many people who would be culturally very, very tuned, but they would be extremely difficult when you tell them to do what most people would do easily in the Western world while they don't follow cultural precepts. So what I'm trying to say is, in Krishna consciousness, we would want to use the time, place, and circumstances to arrive at conclusions saying, okay, this is my audience, this is their culture. I have in my presentation of Krishna consciousness certain cultural aspects. Whilst those cultural aspects are useful, like for example, I prefer wearing a dhoti, I prefer wearing a kurta. Someone else could come to the temple with a pair of jeans and a t-shirt. Yeah, that doesn't bother me. It really doesn't, as long as they're able to adapt to what is required. They're developing some taste and they're able to serve and they're accepting Krishna. Because the cultural aspect is a matter of, I would say, being able to comfortably want the culture as well. And that can be introduced at a later time, on their own terms. Most people do. They get excited and they do it on their own accord. Some of them follow things even more strictly compared to even the traditional Indians, etc. So the point I'm just trying to make is that, to me personally, I wouldn't really pay too much attention to any of this when I'm dealing with people. I would pay attention to their openness and their ability to accept Krishna consciousness, the aspects of Krishna consciousness which are obviously exciting, such as a kirtan, such as the prasadam, if it is very nicely and thoughtfully prepared. You see, I would just be excited to see people accept those. Our books, if people accept it, I would be very happy to see them. And this is very important for all of us who are dealing with the world to also have this understanding. Yeah. I have seen in perhaps what I'm speaking now comes from my spiritual master. I have seen him make absolutely no demands on how a person looks when they come into Krishna consciousness, make no demand on cultural aspects. He will appreciate if someone dresses in a way which is Vedic because that is appropriate, but he would never impose that condition, because if you start imposing that, then the false ego comes up, then you have to deal with the big false ego, and that's never good for preaching. So Ravi, the reason I'm mentioning this to you is, I think what you need to do is you need to start looking at situations where you can compromise on everything except the core principles, and start giving those ideas to whomever you come in touch with without being bothered by what they do. Does it make sense to you, Ravi, as a strategy?
Yes, Prabhu.
Yeah,
I understand.
because if you get bothered and you start wanting people to look Indian, and being Indian these days is not a wonderful advantage. It isn't. I live here in India. I live in India, and it is not an advantage being in an Indian body to be Krishna conscious. I would not say that at all. Yeah, I wouldn't really say that. I wouldn't go that far. It is not an advantage. They don't tend to appreciate things as much as a sincere person who is appreciating it from elsewhere. So the point I'm trying to say is, aspects of Vedic culture are important, but they don't play, I would say, an intensely significant role as an obstacle for someone to accept Krishna into their hearts. So I would work towards giving Krishna into the hearts of people, and I would tend to kind of look at it from that perspective. I'm going to talk about this the following week as well. Ravi, you brought up an important topic. How much are we supposed to get caught up with the form, and how much are we supposed to get caught up with substance? So there is form and there's substance. What is it that I'm supposed to do as a preacher? Am I supposed to focus on form, which is how things are presented, or am I supposed to focus on the substance? Both are important, but then how do you prioritize? What do you expect? How do you convey your priorities? These are all sophisticated aspects of how to reach out. Yeah? Does it make sense?
Yes, Prabhu, absolutely. I understood. While I grow up, I know only these type of my mothers and sisters. They know only saris all the time. But when we come out and see in corporate world and outside, people wearing, because people come from different backgrounds at different levels. Yeah, right. I should not get disturbed by all this. I understood, Prabhu.
Yeah, you should not. It's not the matter of getting disturbed. It's also a matter of understanding that it is not an obstacle to Krishna consciousness. So never go into a thinking process where we start thinking that the way a person dresses is going to prevent them from getting Krishna. that's not a good assumption to make, because it really doesn't matter. People can come dressed in a certain way, they take Krishna consciousness, and then they feel enthused themselves in their heart saying, oh, this is how Krishna dresses up, this is how Radharani dresses up, and then we want to dress the same way. This enthusiasm comes from observing and falling in love with the process of Krishna consciousness. That is more natural than expecting that a sari and a dhoti in general is going to bring about, I would say, a better standard of Krishna consciousness or morality. That I can't really see here, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely,
Yeah.
bro. Yeah. Thank you so much, bro. It's a very clear understanding.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other question or comment?
Yeah, Hare Krishna Prabhu. No question. It's only a comment.
Yes.
I like during the discussion. I like this point when you mentioned that try to desire for a simple life, and the next point is, if you start now, if you are lucky, you can stop material bondage now, or it could be, if you start now, it could be a start to stop the material bondage at least his next life. So I like this point very much. So somebody think that I'm doing everything but I'm not getting anything, but it would be a start to end the things at least in the next life.
It takes longer sometimes. That's why you find so many gradations of devotees. There are devotees who come and then they take over, and then they basically do extraordinarily well in a short period of time. There are devotees who struggle for periods of time, long after they have come, and they're still at the same level. The reason why this is happening is because of what people have done in the previous lifetime and how it is contributing as well.
Reward, Prabhu.
Yeah. Any other comment or question? Okay, so why don't we end here and then we conclude this chapter the following session. In the following session, we will focus on power. We will focus on the presence of power. We will focus on how different people react to it. And we will also talk about the absence of power. And we will discuss the source of power, etc. Thank you for joining me. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Jai.
Thank you, bro.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.